So first of all, we have Olivia McRae. She's a PhD candidate with the Science Communication Outreach Participation and Education Group at the School of Chemistry at the University of Sydney. She has a background in chemistry and environmental science, and she has worked in science education and science communication for over 5 years. Her PhD mixes research and practice and focuses on creative approaches to science communication. Then next up, we have Corey Ruha, and he is an upcoming researcher who's being immersed in the field of rangi taiao from a kaupapa Māori perspective. Having been born and raised in Australia, he moved to New Zealand after university to pursue a journey learning his whakapapa, and he hopes to support his whānau and tangata whenua by advocating for the intrinsic connections and relationships between people of the land and our environments. And then finally, we have Rebecca Pratt, who is in her last semester of study at Auckland University of Technology, where she's completing her Masters of Communication Studies. Working in the New Zealand film industry, Rebecca's passionate about the ways in which our ocean environments are communicated. Rebecca is currently completing her graduate internship at the International Seabird Authority. Ngā mihi mai oha kia koutou ngā koe kōrero. So without further ado, Olivia, would you like to make a start? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Okay. Okay, I'm hoping everybody can see the slides. Yeah, thank you for having me. So great to be here. To start off, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today. So I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So today I'm going to be talking about the confluence of improvisational theatre and science communication. So some of the similarities that the two fields have, and also some of my own research in the area where I've been talking to practitioners who have been using it to perform kind of science-themed shows. So a little bit about me, did get a little bio before, but yeah, so I'm a PhD candidate and my research interests mostly fall in, sorry, that's meant to say science communication in non-traditional spaces, and also creative and or novel approaches to science communication. And the main thing that I've been focusing on in the past year is using how people use improvised theatre as a tool for communicating science. So this is more so using the performance as a direct medium for talking about science. There is also sort of a slightly adjacent field where they use improv to, I guess, train science communicators or scientists to help with their science communication skills, like things that they do at the Allen Alder Centre. But I'm mostly focused on the performance aspect of it. So first off, a little bit of an introduction to what improv is. So this is a definition from Fotis that I quite like. So he describes it as a system of creativity, a mindset that focuses on the cooperation of a group of players to create completely original performances based on set structures and rules that can be performed spontaneously in front of an audience. So there's a really big focus on cooperation, but also there are these core principles that you're taught as improvisers that help you to create scenes that are compelling and engaging and work in the moment on stage. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of these principles that you would get taught if you were going into an improv class, and a little bit how they relate to science communication. And I'm sure looking through this list, you can see how some of these things, or they seem familiar to us as science communicators. So the first one that I want to talk about is this idea of no judgment. So some of you might be familiar with the concept of yes and, if you know anything about improv. So this is the idea that basically if someone says something to you, you say yes, you accept the reality that they're presenting, and then you build on that reality to move the scene forwards. But it's a little bit more complex than that. It's also about how you're accepting that offer. It has to be enthusiastic and supportive. If you're doing it in a way that, you know, that's not very supportive, then that doesn't feel good to the other people on stage. And this is really important as well when we're talking to people, that we're doing so without judgment in science communication. Also being present and active listening. So this is really key when you're on stage, that you're listening to the people who are on stage with you, also listening to the audience to see how they're reacting to what you're saying. And again, it's very useful for science communication to know and be able to gauge how they're reacting to what you're saying and what they're finding interesting. This fourth one is, I very eloquently called it name the thing. But basically what this means is, in a scene, you can spend a lot of time talking around what's happening in the scene instead of what is actually happening in the scene. And it really stalls a scene. It kind of makes the scene go nowhere. And usually the scene doesn't progress until you actually name the exact thing that is happening in the scene. So I think this is also quite applicable to some of the things with science communication, where you want to be really clear about exactly what you're talking about. And the details are important, but you want to make sure that you're not getting bogged down in them, or that the details are in the right place so that you're bringing the audience along with you when you're telling your story that you're trying to convey. And the last one, and this is one of my favorite ones from improv. So it's this principle of make other people look good. And so what this means is that if you're with people on stage, it's your job to make them look really good. And I think if you're presenting with other people, that means, you know, you should be making them look good, or if you're presenting the work of others, make those other people look really good. And also make your audience look good. Like if somebody asks a question, like a genuine question, it can be very scary. Making sure that you say, wow, thank you, what a great question, making them feel good and supported in that environment. So that's better for learning. So the work that I've been doing is in the field called science improv. So it's basically this intersection of psychom and improv, where at the middle you have improv that is about science. So this is mostly what I've been focusing on, talking to practitioners, and there really isn't a lot of research in this area so far. So I've been conducting a study where my research questions were mostly around the motivations and goals of practitioners, the strengths and challenges of using improv for science communication, and the similarities and differences with similar approaches like science theatre or stand-up comedy about science. And so my methodology that I used is that I've done 12 semi-structured interviews with science improv practitioners from across the world, and I'm analysing that data through thematic analysis so that I can pull out common threads from those interviews. But just for today, because there's a lot of research questions there, I'm mostly just going to be focusing on the strengths and challenges of using improv for psychom. So these are some of my preliminary results. So we have some of the key themes that have come out from strengths and challenges. So one of the strengths that a lot of people talked about was how it involves the audience more. It's a lot more interactive than some other formats that are perhaps more scripted. It encourages active listening. And so I asked a lot of people why they thought that it encourages active listening. And they were talking about how, oh, the people in the audience don't know what's going to happen next on stage. And they know that the people on stage also don't know what's going to happen next. And that's very interesting to watch. And one of the people that I talked to described it as watching somebody on a tightrope and sort of like wondering if they're going to fall or when they're going to fall, but being amazed that they're still managing to stay on their rope. It's also a good environment for learning. So going back to that idea of, you know, you're creating this really supportive environment. And I think that really helps to, you know, open people up to, you know, it's okay to make some mistakes or to not know everything. And opens you up to being able to learn new things. And it's also very adaptive and flexible. So you can adapt it to your audience, or you can adapt it to different contexts, depending on what kind of show you're trying to present. So there are some really great strengths, but there are also a number of challenges that the people that I talked to brought up. So one of the main ones that they brought up is that it's hard to go in depth. So you're kind of stuck at the tip of the iceberg there. So, you know, if you're looking to present a show where you want to go into lots and lots of detail about a specific topic and you really want to unpack a lot of the nuance in that area, then improv is probably not the best format to do that, because it could go in any direction, and you actually don't have a lot of control over where it goes, because you're making something up on the spot in collaboration with other people, and they're also contributing to that. So it's not just about what you're doing in the scene. Another challenge is that it's still niche and lacks funding. So in terms of the audiences for it can be somewhat niche. They don't necessarily get the same audiences that something like a stand-up comedy show might get. And also that it lacks financial support from artistic institutions and also from like scientific institutions and stuff like that. And it's also hard to find people who can do both. So it's hard to find people who are both good improvisers and good at coming up with ways to convey the science on the spot. And so this can sometimes be alleviated depending on who or like what kind of format you're using. So for instance, a lot of the people that I talked to, the improvisers were not necessarily scientists. And so they had the science and the improv quite siloed, where they would invite a scientist to come and give a talk at the start. And that's like the legit science part of the show. And then the improvisers can then use that talk as inspiration for their own scenes. And, you know, if some of the things are not exactly right or a little bit silly, then it doesn't matter because you're not presenting that as the you know, the legit science. So you've had the science part and then you've siloed off like some of the entertainment, which is about the science, but not necessarily as serious or presented as seriously. So just to finish off, I wanted to highlight a few quotes that I got from people in the interviews. So this is from somebody who's talking about that interactivity. So she was saying, live improv very much reflects the people in the room, the atmosphere. You're getting emotional responses from the people in the room. You can change it and you can adapt it. If people feel uncomfortable, you get to choose. Do you make them more uncomfortable for a reason, or do you lighten the mood and release the tension? So you get to make those choices as an improviser, depending on how the audience reacts. And the other one that I really liked, which I think is just a good way to think about what improv can potentially do for like perceptions of science and scientists is, so one of my participants says, I want them to see that scientists can be silly. I feel like there's a stereotype of scientists, which is it's scary and too complicated. And I want people to leave the show being like, I couldn't tell the difference between the scientist improv and the regular improvisers, which makes sense because we're no different. So I have a few people that I would like to acknowledge. So my supervisors, Alice Motion and Rain Pullen, who have been giving me a lot of support and guidance over the past few years. And also the my research group, the Scope group, they're a great group of people to work with. And yeah, just thank you for having me, for listening to my talk. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much, Olivia. Yeah, I was just wondering whether that ding was even audible. But you were well below 8 minutes, so that was fine. Yeah, so next up, we have Kori Ruha. Ngamihi Kori, over to you.
Kia ora. Yeah, I'll stop sharing my video just so it's using my phone internet, but te pupuke, te hihiri, te mahara, te hinangaro, te manako, te wānanga. Ko iu matua nui ko te kore, ko te pua nui, ko te pōroa, ko te ao nui, ko te aoroa. Ko rangi nui e tū ake nei, ko papatua nuku e tau iho nei. Ko ngā atua iho, ko hine ahu one tōni kuro, ko hine tītama ka putara te ora tangata ki tā o maarama. Tihei mauri ora. So there are many versions of the creation story, and the karakia or chant I recited was just one way that our people have told this story. The story tells of how Rangi Nui, the Sky Father, and Papatua Nuku, the Mother Earth, were clasped together in a tight, loving embrace, which bound their children, a number of atua, in between them. It was Tāne, the atua of forests, who was able to separate his parents and allow his siblings to emerge into the light of consciousness. Māori can trace our ancestry back to this point of creation, which then shapes our values, our worldviews, our beliefs, and our understanding of what it means to exist. Therefore, to understand where we're heading, we must look to the past to acknowledge and understand how we've arrived to the present. And I'd like to acknowledge Marcus Winter for his beautiful interpretation of that story with his send art. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā iwi, e ngā rauranga tira mā tēnā koutou. Good afternoon to everyone attending this virtual session. Ko koi Ruha tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei whakaheke no Te Arawa waka. My name is Koi Ruha and I'm a descendant of the Te Arawa canoe. And currently I'm based in Rotorua, emerging into the world of research as an upcoming researcher paired with Scion and representing my iwi. So today I'll be presenting the collective efforts of myself, Sylvia Tapuke, Aniki Young, and the input of many more amazing minds that help develop a kaupapa Māori literature review of how land use actions can benefit freshwater systems from a uniquely Māori perspective. And so firstly, I'd just like to quickly clarify what I mean by kaupapa Māori literature review and what a uniquely Māori perspective both mean. So kaupapa Māori methodology, as quoted by Linda Smith, is research by Māori, for Māori, and with Māori. So it's an Indigenous methodology that hopes to return balance to Indigenous ways of knowing. This has been done in our research by empowering Indigenous researchers to lead this literature review, promoting our Indigenous values, worldviews, and belief systems. I mentioned a uniquely Māori perspective on land use actions. And by this, I mean, what are alternative actions that have been overlooked by the Western scientific paradigm, but are emphasized as significant by the Māori voice? So we looked at hapu and iwi management plans, Māori news stories and interviews, articles, videos on YouTube aimed to develop kōrero and wānanga, old radio files, journal articles, and waiata in kapahaka. So to ensure the legitimacy of the literature, we were reviewing and, to ensure our approach was to amplify the voices of tangata whenua. We allowed for literature in all formats, as long as they had Māori authorship or had the self-determined Māori voice through the reviewed piece. And then through thematic analysis, we were able to group the common themes by aligning them to a Māori pūrākau, or traditional narrative, where Tāne, who I mentioned, the Māori deity of the forest, retrieved ngā te wānanga, or the baskets of knowledge from the heavens. So I aligned a lot of our work to these 4 baskets. So Te Kete Tuauri, which is more around whakapapa, so the genealogy of all things. And we could relate that to all the pieces that had interconnection of all things linking people, place, and spirit. We have Te Kete Tuatea, which is things to do with practices like earthworks, gardening, fishing, and warfare. And we related that to knowledge practice, which enhances the well-being of people and place in unison. And we also have Te Kete Arunui, which is all things to do with philosophy, karakia, so chants, rituals. And we relayed that to taonga tuku iho, which is all of the treasures and knowledge that have been passed down. And then in recent times, modern times, a 4th basket has been proposed by Timoti Kāretu, which is Te Kete Aroiti. And that's to do with a lot of modern concepts. So we related that to ture, which we class as policy, legislation, and all the international systems, which are now part of the contemporary Māori experience. And so with these themes, we were able to bring together all the commonalities of the literature, and then we sought to derive tangible actions that were speaking through the literature. And so together with a few people, I was able to work around and create this graphic. And it's a holistic worldview in alignment with a basic overview of the water cycle. By this, we wanted to clarify that there's no one solution to what land use action will clean our water, but these are just 5 of many Indigenous solutions that feed into a stream of solutions. And so these 5 actions particularly rely on and encourage the development of Indigenous people's physical and spiritual connection to place in order for it to thrive. And because I'm actually not sure what time we're at, but I don't think I have that much time to go deeply into many of them, but I'll try and touch base on all of them. So engaging with tangata whenua, engaging with people of the land to incorporate their values into all things. So something that Komatua James Waiwai said is that I was created out of all children of Dangi Nui and Papatuanuku. So if anything shows up out there or within me or on top or on me, it's going to show up somewhere in my environment or within me. So, you know, caring for land and water is a personal issue for many Māori, and this action emphasizes the need for Māori to be leading these spaces, if not co-leading. Strengthening the practice of traditional and temporary tikanga or holistic methods on the whenua. So this might be in the form of rāhui, which is prohibition on the use of a place based on cultural reasons, or maramataka, which aligns practices and people's energies to the moon phases. Or it might be synthesizing Western science and mātauranga and, you know, traditional ways of knowing through, you know, GIS, through web design, data storage and analysis. So yeah, the key is, you know, how do we balance out the economic interests with a strong association to social, cultural, and environmental elements of that. So we have supporting opportunities to enhance kaitiakitanga, which in this sort of context means a profound sense and role of guardianship to the environment. So, you know, I've seen and heard a lot of kōrero, a lot of sayings, ko au te whenua, ko te whenua ko au. I am the land is me. Ko au te awa, ko te awa ko au. I am the river is me. And so this, you know, whether through businesses, policies, events, we found there's a call to give space, resourcing, and time to allow our people to lead the healing of our environments. And it's essential that our people, particularly our young people, are enabled to connect back to Papatūānuku. So the encouragement of Māori to undertake a journey of reconnecting through ancestral ties and their families is crucial for the development of kaitiakitanga. So conserving and restoring wahi tapu, so culturally significant sites. These might be burial grounds, old village sites, or culturally significant natural land or water features. And some ways that have been suggested to protect these places are, you know, use of signs and information panels, sharing of knowledge, informally and formally, and, you know, protection through planning and policy. There's obvious biophysical benefits to protecting an area, but it also, you know, enables us to connect back through our areas of spiritual and physical heritage sites. So, and revitalizing the use of traditional Māori place names. So to speak from a Māori proverb, toi tū te kupu, toi tū te mana, toi tū te whenua. So by upholding the language, the prestige is established and the land is preserved. So, you know, many Māori have called for people to use correct pronunciation and recognition of our traditional place names rather than English place names, you know, simply saying Aotearoa, you know, New Zealand, and acknowledgement is an acknowledgement of our indigeneity and acknowledgement of our connection to place, which all of these interconnect and it all feeds back into each other. So just to try and wrap all that up, just a few things, you know, a thing that happens quite often is that all things in, you know, that are brought from Te Ao Māori, so the Māori world, into government is standardized. So there's no one size fits all for Māori. You know, we're each our unique people in our own unique place, and we should be able to co-design and co-deliver systems and processes to cater for those needs. Secondly, you know, I think everyone should be able to try and enhance that connection, whether it's through learning the Māori language and its protocols, or learning about Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So, you know, having a sense of, having a sense of empathy for the colonization and the loss of land is key to how we can move forward together. And just thirdly and finally, Indigenous knowledge is passed down in many forms. So our languages, our stories, our arts and crafts, our songs, our dances, they are our library. And, you know, we pass down wisdom. And then the hope is that Western science supports us to further understand that wisdom. So therefore, without that training of context and culture, the interpretation of this wisdom should be left with the Indigenous people, while science then supports our endeavors for our people to better understand and utilize that wisdom. And just again, to reiterate what I said at the start, we have to look to the past in order for us to acknowledge and understand how we've arrived to the present. So hopefully then we can forge a path ahead together, united in partnership. Nā reira, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Thank you for listening.
Well, tēnā koe, Corey. Thank you very much for that. That was an amazing kōrero, and I love the illustration on that last slide as well. It just kind of felt like I want to say at home, but I don't know if
it was drafted on the back of a pie packet, that one.
Beautiful, beautiful diagram. Yeah, I love your kōrero as well, and we'll have more time to talk at the end. So next up, we have Rebecca. So Rebecca, ngā mihi, off you go.
Sure, thank you, Laura, and to Corey and Olivia for your kōrero. Yeah, beautiful. All right, I'm just going to jump in and share my screen. Okay, hopefully, is that looking good to you guys? Yeah, okay. So firstly, thank you, SCANZ, for the opportunity to speak today, and to the audience for attending. It's a real honour to present to you. So, let's get back to the first slide. Let's go. All right, jumping into it. This talk is in two parts. The first is my journey. How did I end up in a world of science communication to do with our moana, our oceans? And part two is the research itself, utilising bioacoustics from New Zealand reefs in documentary film production. There's two parts, they're intrinsically linked. I love my research because of the journey I went on to get there. So with that said, let's get into it. This story begins in South Taranaki, Aotearoa. I moved here with my parents when I was 3 months old. This is Ohawi Beach, the first day I ever visited, and this place was my playground. If you were to look at my school books, which Mum delightfully kept, you would also quickly notice, if you were to run some thematic analysis, that this was a place that I was inspired by, and very much was a place of education for me. But that education very much stopped at the edge of the seafloor. That education, sorry, ended. Oh my gosh, sorry. Can you guys still see my screen? Sorry, that's embarrassing. Is that one all right?
Yeah, we can hear you, see you.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, awesome. So the knowledge that I learned really stopped at the tide. I would talk about the black sand beaches, the strong winds, the strong currents, but the edge of, I would look out at that blue horizon and just wondered what lay below. Like many of us do, but to be fair, Taranaki conditions are pretty gnarly. It was inaccessible to me as a kid. But what I didn't know was that off of the South Taranaki coast, there is a large shallow shelf. It extends all the way out into our economic exclusive zone, which is depicted by that purple line there. So you're at about 25 meters depth, average, scuba depth. I was about 15 years old when the mediation off of South Taranaki changed dramatically. But perceptions are powerful things when you don't know what's out there. And the diagram in the middle was very much mediated in our newspapers. And you can see there's a ship, there's a water column, and there's some seabed. But as part of the Environmental Protection Authority's legislation, they're responsible for granting or declining consents for the marine consent and marine discharge consent. They put on an open day. The company's required to publicly notify the public. And so my mum went along and attended, where she bumped into a recreational fisherman. And he said, "I wonder what's going to happen to all the reefs offshore." And Mum said, "Reefs? What reefs?" A few days later, he brought along some pictures to show her. It's fair to say that a picture says 1,000 words, but to Mum and very much me, it sparked 1,001 questions. One of which was what makes the undocumented subtidal reefs of South Taranaki unique. It just so happened that at the same time there was some funding available through Curious Minds, MB's fund, and so Mum had been knocking on a few doors wanting to know a few more stories about these reefs that a few people know about. And so the South Taranaki Underwater Club put in an application. There were two iwi project partners, Ngāti Ronui and Ngā Roru, and 2 local high schools, Hawera High School and Patia Area School. We were granted funding and Project Reef, South Taranaki, was born. At this point, I was off to university, passionate about doing communication, environmental communication, and I jumped on as a volunteer media lead, creating a Facebook page to put out those photos and engage our community, and also a website for education. So this really concludes part 1 of this talk. At about 20 years old, middle of my undergrad studies, I was realizing that there was great power when different sectors of a community come together to share knowledge, as many of us know. But what is knowledge sharing? What is marine communication? Well, honestly, in my heart, it's anything you can imagine. And listening, lots of listening. As much as we love the benthic surveys that we run, or the dissections with the high school students, it's equally as important, as shown in these pictures, to just kind of go with the flow, to improvise. In this case, we're with 5-year-olds and we're teaching them about eagle rays. So chapter 2, how does this all lead into my research and what I'm talking about today? Well, remember those Taranaki conditions I talked about? Access to the reefs is very difficult, and we had to come up with a solution. So we designed some in-situ cameras. We deployed these 11 kilometres offshore of Patia, 23 metres deep on that shallow shelf. They record intermittently, day and night, and are designed by community for community. It's important to note that the South Taranaki coast is largely under-researched, so we were really out there to try and create a baseline. And we had success. 600 hours of footage later, we had a bunch of different species, and we had to work with local, national and international scientific community to ID them. And me, as the volunteer media lead, I chucked these videos into a timeline, and I went to go put some music on them, like the documentaries that I aspired to make, and I accidentally hit play. What on earth was all of this noise? Pops, clicks, grunts, a cacophony of sound. You'll see that odd, strange timeline there. And basically down the bottom, you can see that there's just constant noise. And this is about 48 hours of footage all condensed. I tried to crop it best I could. Yeah, that's basically what we were hearing. So naturally, we were like, we have no idea what these sounds are. Let's go try find someone who can help us. And we contacted the Lee Marine Lab through Auckland University, the awesome Dr. Craig Bradford. And I basically sent an email which was saying, hey, Craig, could you help us ID what these sounds are? You know, and if not, is there an encyclopedia of marine noises that you could refer us to? And Craig delightfully said, hey, it's awesome what you're doing, but no, there's not. But welcome to the world of marine bioacoustics. It's a relatively new area of study in Western science, founded by Dr. Marie Fish in 1946. Super cool story, recommend you check it out. And it was amazing to me. Amazing that this ocean space, the foundation stone of what we're observing and seeing, is largely driven by sound, reproduction, feeding, navigation, predatory behavior. It blew my mind. It was also very humbling because a lot of those frequencies are above and below the human range of hearing. So I got very passionate, as you can probably tell, about marine bioacoustics and really got into learning about them. And I then came across a paper which I largely dedicate my research to. And that paper was by Dr. Craig Bradford and a few other incredible marine bioacousticians. And it said, despite the famous marine explorer Jacques Cousteau describing the underwater environment as a silent world, scientists have revealed it is clearly a world filled with a myriad of sound sources. And as a film scholar at this point, having left university and now in the New Zealand film industry, I said, oh, Craig, you know, like that was, you know, the 60s, 70s. It won an Academy Award, but it was back in the day. Like, it was amazing what they were doing. And now we have the technology, you know, now we have these millions of dollars invested in ocean documentaries. So, and then, you know, as a science communicator, when you kind of sit there and you sit with that thought a little bit longer, and I started to realize, hold up. And I went back and watched those films that really inspired me. They still do as a kid. But I noticed something. Where were the bioacoustics? So I popped back to AUT and had a master's project in mind. I approached the School of Communication Studies and they said, bioacoustics, that should probably be in the sciences. And I said, no, it's got to be in the School of Communications. And 2 awesome supervisors jumped on, Christina Milligan, an executive producer in the New Zealand film industry, and Dr. Arazu Zalapur, who's a film scholar, and amazing ladies. And they asked me the very important question, why? Why documentary and bioacoustics? What's this big thing you have with documentary? And I said, well, generally speaking, documentary is supposedly entertaining, but also educational, right? Distribution is massive. It connects millions of people to what are largely inaccessible ocean environments. And I believe there's a responsibility that comes with that. 2 hours of people's lives, and if the sonic abilities of our ocean are so important and foundation stones, why aren't they being represented? They said, but what about those films with the whales? We know whales make a beautiful song, and I said, yes, and I absolutely love them, but I'm not interested in them. I want to know about the reefs and the ecosystem. This is all interconnected and it's blowing my mind. And then also I said I wanted to kind of challenge the industry as a whole. It's not just documentary, we see it in advertisements and we see it in documentary series. So yeah, we decided to run some quantitative analysis first. How much out of 20 films was bioacoustics making, up that soundscape? We had to round up to 0.1. That was followed by some qualitative analysis, specifically thematic analysis, and like largely speaking, I mean, the thesis does this all in depth, but we know, we drop under that surface and it's music and narration. So I quickly realized that before I could turn to the industry and say, why aren't we doing this? I had to see, could it be done? And so the research became practice-led, 50% a 25-minute documentary and 50% the exegesis. And the really fun thing about this process has been, because it's practice-led, it's exploratory, my journey naturally falls into the research. And I got to do the same thing as that Project Reef Live, bringing different sectors of the community together. So we've got bioacousticians working on the script development, lending a hydrophone to post-production, and working in the soundscape. We've got the community, Project Reef is the location where we're shooting, and running it through a communications department. Now, the thing that I really wanted to do for the conference was to show you guys the trailer. Unfortunately, with COVID lockdowns, we couldn't get our last 2 interviews in. So instead, we've rescheduled for January 2022, and I'm going to be sending the link through to SCANZ. So hopefully you guys can check it out, see what you think about the soundscape, see what you think about the way the oceans are represented, and hopefully question the content that you do see in terms of the soundscape and representing the important voice that is our oceans. Cool. Thank you.
Pena Koe Rebecca, thank you very much, just in the nick of time. Ngā mihi mai hoa kia koutou. Thank you, all 3 of you, very much for sharing your amazing kōrero. Lots to process, and we do have lots of questions coming through. So the first one we have, that is from Emma, is collating them. So this is from a while ago, but I'll start with her first. So it's from Caroline for Olivia. How does Yes and work with science elements where an audience is wary of the science, for example, vaccination, climate change, and so on?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So I'm not under any kind of illusion that one science improv show is going to make the difference to change people's hearts and minds like that. Like, that's a process that does take a long time. But I think something that is really important is that you're definitely not going to change minds from a place of judgment. So, the yes doesn't necessarily have to be agreeing with someone, but I think that you can still say yes and validate what somebody has said, and, so that they know that they have been listened and they have been heard. And then from that position where you have built a connection, hopefully then you can explore things more from there. I think the other way where it can help is that people don't necessarily come to these shows because they're about science. They come to them because they're improv shows, and often they're billed with other troops that have nothing to do with science. So it's just like in the middle of a show with a bunch of other stuff. So I think it also gives you access to an audience that wouldn't necessarily engage with this stuff, and gives them sort of like an entry level position into something, into science, in a way that's, maybe a little bit more comedic, and helps to kind of like break down those barriers as science is something that, it can be really inaccessible. So hopefully that addresses some of your question.
Thank you. Yes, we have another one for you. I think we're going to block them a little bit earlier rather than hopping between speakers. So we have a second question for you, Olivia. Do you prefer using improv to devise shows, brackets, which are then rehearsed, close brackets, or using actual or using or doing actual live improvised science shows?
Yeah. So I definitely come from an improv background. I've never done any kind of scripted theatre. So it's not an area that I'm particularly comfortable with. So in terms of like the shows that I have been planning for like later on my project, they are very much improv shows, but there are kind of like three main forms of improv. So there's short form, which is kind of like the whose line is it anyway kind of improv. And you have long form, which if any of you have seen like Middleditch and Schwartz on Netflix, that's kind of like one type of long form improv where they're, you know, shows that run from like 15 minutes to an hour. And then there's also what's called sketch-based improv. So this is basically where you use improv as a rehearsal tool to like generate ideas, creativity, and then you use those ideas to then script a show. So it can definitely be used in that way. And I think it would be a good way to design a show if you are trying to target something more specifically, but still in sort of like a creative way. But I haven't explored that as much because I'm just scripted theatre is something that I have no idea about.
Thank you. Our next question is for Corey from Charlotte. Kia ora, Corey. Tautoko your kōrero and pikitia. I'm wondering how this infuses your mahi at Scion and in what ways this influences your science colleagues.
Oh, kapai. Firstly, I just quickly want to acknowledge Olivia and Rebecca, like awesome work in really niche spaces and niche and creative ways of interpreting science. So yeah, kapai kōrua, awesome stuff that you guys are doing. And amazing presentations. For the part-I, yeah, I mean, for Scion in particular, I'm just contracting to Scion. So as part of the project I'm working in is one of the Our Land and Water projects. And so as part of this project in particular that we've been doing, they were hoping to bring up youth or young people in research. And so I was nominated through my ties in a lot of climate change work that I've been doing in Te Arawa. And yeah, it was with Sylvia Tapuke and co-leading with Anika Young on this project, who are amazing women in research, especially in kaupapa Māori research. So they've been like awesome mentors for me. But the actual everyone at Scion has been, you know, they are so receptive to everything in Te Ao Māori, in the Māori world, and bringing that into Scion. And the actual Māori team, Te Ao Māori team in Scion is amazing. So there's a lot of support and good foundations always can be worked on, and it always can get better. But I guess in regards to you know, maybe central government sort of agencies or Crown Research Institute, Scion is actually really good at infusing this into their mahi. I've had a lot of people asking for the literature review. So it'll be out on the Our Land and Water website soon. Yeah, they're just really busy at the moment, so getting it up there might be a bit delayed, but yeah, it should be available, and yeah, a lot of people at Scion have been referring to it, which is awesome.
Ngā mihi. We have another one for you, Corey. Kia ora, Corey, from Georgia. Te Arawa represents. I'm super interested in the new Tekete Arawiti. What is the best source to read an intro like this one?
There's a paper, or hold on, what's the paper called? I could probably just type it up in the chat, but there's an actual paper by Timoti Kāretu, which goes through the whole whakapapa of that kete. It's an awesome paper. So I'll find that. It's just in my references in the report, so I can type that into the chat there.
Ngamihi. I think, I'm not sure how many questions, we might end up going back to each speaker, but we're just in 2 at a time at the moment, just to like calm down a bit on the hopping. Next up for Rebecca from Victoria. It's been an absolute pleasure interacting with Project Reef Life over the years. You bring out the importance of mainly listening. To what extent are we listening or not listening enough to our communities in our science communication efforts? And that's to Rebecca. Thank you.
Lovely. Oh, well, kia ora, Victoria, wherever you are. Yeah, she's been absolutely amazing in terms of getting us that initial funding and working with us in terms of what communicating within communities looks like. So wow, okay, in answer to your question, I think there's always like there's more to be done, like when it comes to connecting and things. I mean, we were pretty riled. Well, riled, is that the right? We're just curious, I think. Curious minds, I know, but like literally curious to know more about that marine space. So we were actively looking for funding, right? I think there's so many stories out there though that are just locked away in our communities, maybe you know, or maybe it's just like oral knowledge or different sectors, which, you know, like in terms of discovery and things, there's a lot of potential there. So yeah, I think it's connecting people to the right funding and things. Our situation was, yeah, quite unique, but the beautiful thing is once that happens, it's just sparked so many more stories, and we've been able to, you know, say, hey, there's this fund and it's happening. Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think, yeah, communication of funding is everything. So definitely keen to push that one out. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I've just spotted a question a little bit higher up from Charlotte Shunde. Rebecca, love your work and backstory. I'm wondering if your bioacoustic works in the South Taranaki reefs has been used in the environmental court hearings. RE Trans-Tasman resource minings of iron ore off the South Taranaki Bight to illustrate the diversity and richness of marine life. And so can you tell us a bit more about that?
Oh boy. I would say if you're interested, highly recommend checking out the impact assessment put forward by the company and the EPA's report back on that with regard to the declining and then granting of consents. It was a pretty long, let's just have a look here. Were they used? Our ones? No, they weren't. So yeah, it's a very complex process, granting of consents and what's required for that. I don't believe the company's dropped a hydrophone though in the South Taranaki area that they're doing it. There's a lot of modelling though, and that's, you know, accepted. So yeah, but from my point of view, man, drop the hydrophone, listen in, it's amazing, and we could learn so much. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but check out the EPA's report on that. Try not to be too political.
Thank you, Rebecca. We're just going to circle back now to Olivia. So this is from Emma for Olivia. Does the validation of feelings come into the active listening brackets, even if you may not agree with their view? It makes me think of communication principles for parenting / teaching.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Yeah, maybe explain a bit more about what active listening is and how that works with,
Yeah, so I mean, active listening, I think there's sort of 2 components to active listening in terms of there is the active listening that happens internally and that you're really tuned in and present to what the person is saying. And there are also, and then the second part is the cues that you're giving that person that you are actually listening to them so that they know. Because, you know, I think that can really help with those connections, because if you feel like you're being listened to, you're more likely to share, right? Like if you've ever had a conversation with somebody and they're kind of looking off in the other direction, or they're interrupting you and stuff, like it doesn't make you want to share. So I think that is definitely a component of the active listening. Can you just repeat the question? I'm not sure if I've actually got the answer.
No, that's all right. So the question was, does the validation of feelings come into the active listening?
Oh, right. Well, then, yes, I guess it does. Yeah, because so, you know, confirming that you are listening to them. And, you know, like I was saying before, I think that there are ways to show people that you are listening and that you're understanding what they're saying without necessarily agreeing with them. You know, I think in science communication, you don't necessarily want to be in a position where you're having to agree with people 100% of the time. But, you know, you can still do it in a way where, you know, you can even just say, you know, thank you for sharing your perspective with me, or something like that. Doesn't necessarily mean, like, I'm not saying, oh, yeah, I agree with you, but I am at least like validating that. So I think that is definitely part of it.
Thank you. And our next question is for Corey again, actually from me. My question is, what impact has this been for your immediate family and your personal life? Like, how has your journey helped your family? Because I know that this is very important work for you, and I'd love to hear more about that if it's not too private.
Sorry, was this me?
Oh,
sorry, I think my internet sort of cut it.
No, that was all right. This is this was I loved your korero and about Uru Mahi at Zion, and I was just wondering, like, what have you taken from that back to your whānau, and like how has that impacted your whānau, and how has it, you know, had an impact on your personal life? If it's okay to say.
yeah, of course. No, this has been a really personally uplifting, empowering experience to undertake this research. It's made me look at things, or it's not really made me look at things differently, but it's enforced a lot of the positive aspects of connection that I you know, always felt were there, but you know, this has really solidified a lot of things for me. And looking back at where I connect to and who I connect to, this just drives me even harder to be able to enhance those connections and the well-being of people and place being interdependent, and they are directly proportional. You know, we have there's a saying, hoki ki tō maunga kia pūrea ai koe ki ngā hau o tāwhiri mātea, which means return back to your mountain so that you can be cleansed by the winds of tāwhiri. And that proverb has been used behind a paper.
I think we've you might have lost the
you know,
in
terms of science, it's like, you know, sometimes it gets a bit wee wah wah when I'm talking to people at Scion, but there's no doubt the way that some people feel when you go into the forest or you go cleanse the ocean, you come out a bit different, you know. So yeah, it just puts a lot of things in perspective, and for whānau as well, you know, them sharing this journey with me has been really amazing.
Oh, ngā mihi mai oha anō pia koe, Corey, thank you very much. And it's wonderful to have different perspectives as well to science communication, because a lot of people just kind of put it in this narrow field, and it's this scientific knowledge everywhere, you know, you've got to acknowledge it really. So thank you very much, Corey. Our next question is for Rebecca from Kildren. Instead of comments, I love how you can see your journey in your schoolwork, but I think we can reframe that as you discussed how you had to stand true to not going to the comms school and not science. So maybe you can describe some of the lessons from that journey.
Yeah, sorry, that one was working kind of like in the communication school for this research. Is that kind of the question, was it?
Sorry, I can read it out again. The question was, you discussed how you had to stand true to not to, sorry, you have to stand true to going to the comms school and not science. I think I read it out incorrectly, sorry. Can you describe the lessons from that journey?
Sure. So just to clarify, yeah, so I'm not like a from the sciences, so communications was my school, but it was just a really interesting process going into like graduate studies and bringing in the word actually bioacoustics, like, you know, in your research question even I had it in there, and one of the first drafts that came back was like, do we need this word? And I was like, actually, yeah, like we really do. It's whole field and communicating it. So yeah, I mean, it's just been really surprising, but I think sometimes we can get really into you know, a particular area of research, and sometimes we forget that the very words that we use are sometimes, you know, they're stories in themselves that need to be talked through and expressed before we, you know, jump into like more of a conversation. So what were the main challenges? I think honestly, my challenge is personally and as a filmmaker and in the communication space has been just realizing my place in the oceans. You know, just to be down there, like we can't breathe down there. We don't move very nicely when we're scubaing compared to, you know, your seals and everything around you. And we can hardly communicate. So we need to really open our ears, and we need to harness technology to do that. That's been a big challenge. So like when it comes to those sound recordings, actually, which relates to the last question, one of the biggest challenges is we get the recordings, we're not bioacousticians, and they're really busy and quite underfunded. So what do we do with this massive repository and bulk of data that we're just constantly getting as a baseline? Where do we put that? So it's connecting with, yeah, science communicators, students, graduate students, and saying, hey, we've got all this stuff, you know, what do we do with it? How do we communicate it? Yeah, so, you know, when it comes to putting it in front of, for example, the EPA, it's only as good as what we can actually pull from that data. So that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, when it comes to community science and stuff, and has been one of the biggest challenges in my research. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So that wraps us up for today.